The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by DraftKings. Sweet 16, March Madness bets. We got to figure out who, if our brackets are busted, who we can actually bet on to recoup some of our money. Also, maybe some NBA futures towards the end. Yes, folks, we are talking about basketball on today's Pat Mayo Experience. An outlier, but this is the time of year that it is, and I'm just getting ramped up for basketball, so this is perfect. Also, if you're out there right now, please smash the like button to the video, and in the comment section, give me your updated winner of this year's March Madness NCAA Tournament. Joining me on the line, you may know him as the Sports Cheetah. It's Preston Johnson. What's going on, my man?
How's it going? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Can you tell everyone what you've been up to since leaving ESPN? Because people have been asking me. I was like, well, I'll just have Preston on. He can explain it for himself.
I'm trying to do a little bit of everything right now. I am mostly once a week doing an NBA game where it's this alternate broadcast. I'm doing it through Yahoo, but it's really through the NBA where on League Pass, you have the home away option. Well, once a week, they're doing a betting broadcast option where we're basically just calling the game and we're watching it live. And we're able to kind of talk about the in-game lines, futures bets for the teams included. And, we can't really carry that conversation on for forever. So we talk regular general hoops too. So it's a pretty fun time, good time. If I usually turn down these days, the regular announcers anyways. So I'm kind of a snob in that regard. So I think people have enjoyed this, and it's good to kind of just bring a betting platform to the public and to the audience. And it's cool the NBA is forward thinking and doing that.
Yeah, so hopefully that this becomes so successful, this can translate over into other sports. I've talked about everything so many times on the show that I'm just waiting for football to launch this. Maybe with a deal with Amazon now that they can actually provide, like they'll have the scouting feed. Let's just get the gambling and or fantasy feed, and I'll be good with that. And I'm waiting for the all gambling feed for golf. They tried it, and it was hilariously bad as they put a whole bunch of people on both the desk.
How long ago was that?
It was at the Waste Management Phoenix Open, so Super Bowl weekend. They did an all gambling broadcast.
Okay. I didn't see that.
Well, no one did, and they featured a whole bunch of people who have clearly never bet on anything in their lives. So that's always fun.
That kills it from the get-go. Yeah, there's nothing you can do there.
No, I think their idea was, we'll take people who just love golf and turn them into bettors, not realizing that the only people seeking out an online alternate feed are the people who are already betting on it.
That's true.
So let's talk tournament. Does anyone have a good bracket anymore, or is everyone just kind of fucked for the entire year?
I think a lot of people still have at least their Final Four has a chance. If you went with Houston or Loyola Chicago and you like the underdog story there, Baylor's alive, Gonzaga's alive, Michigan, Alabama, Florida State, and the other region. They're all alive. But I think a lot of people are pretty dead in the sense that they don't have, nearly the 16 teams that are in this, and probably sitting at like 10 of 16 and just hoping they get the Final Four exactly right for your bracket pool or whatever. So it was fun though. I think the stat is that it was the most upsets, and what like the general public calls an upset, or the tournament and NCAA calls an upset, is if it's a 5 seeds lower. So 11 over a 6, a 12 over a 5, etc. It was the most they've ever had in a first round, a second round. And it's one short of being the most they've ever had in an entire tournament. I believe it's 13, and we're at 12. So that makes it fun for fans. And if you're betting and you're betting on underdogs, even better.
Well, I mean, I always enjoy betting on a good underdog. So we hit some like big money line numbers in the first round and even the second round. But like when you have a 15 win, a 13 win all of a sudden, or a 14 win, you're looking a whole lot better, and it can kind of recoup some of the losses that you made along the way just because you're getting paid 3-1, 4-1 on your money. Sure. But when we look at the round of 16, the Sweet 16, is there any team that jumps out to you right away, spread wise or even money line wise, that is probably the route that we want to go? Like, we're going to keep riding Loyola Chicago here? They're 6.5 point favorites.
We can go to that game first. I'll say this. I think there's a general theme, and you'll find this in betting markets in general, no matter what league it is, what sport it is. But the markets, or the public perception tends to revert to recency, is the way I'll call it. And so people remember a lot of these upsets. They like the story with Loyola Chicago, but also remember Oregon State. They're a 12 seed that just had 2 upset wins over Tennessee and Oklahoma State. And I think this is a spot where think of it this way. So before Oregon State went on that run in the Pac-12 tournament and then winning these 2 games in the Big Dance, if I had lined this game, Loyola Chicago, Oregon State, so we're talking like 2.5 weeks ago, my personal projections would have lined it closer to 9. Okay. And then after that Pac-12 tournament, I'm adjusting some data. Obviously the Beavers graded out well over those few games in the tournament. So I'm adjusting them up. Even before the Big Dance, I would have lined this more like 8. And here we are now. Oregon State pulls off 2 upsets. Remember, Loyola Chicago just smashed Illinois, though. So they've also kind of bumped up and been upgraded. I think this should be more like 7.5. Obviously been upgrading the Beavers yet again as they've been winning more and more games. But ultimately, they're not a team that shot very well all year long. And they've just shot pretty well from 3, especially their last 6 games. And I think Loyola Chicago's defense will be able to kind of stifle them to some extent. My personal buy point would be more like -6. It's -6.5, so it's close. But that's the side I would look. But kind of, I guess, taking that a step further, then looking at some of these other games, it's interesting because generally you think, oh, sharp side, you're supposed to pick underdogs, this and that. Look, some of these underdogs, because it's been such a wild opening weekend of tournament basketball, look, Oral Roberts, I think, is extremely overvalued. And they're the 15 seed. I think they're the second one ever to make it into the Sweet 16. They beat Ohio State. They beat Florida. Look, like I think they were the worst tournament, or I should say defense and adjusted defensive efficiency entering the tournament. They've escaped twice down the stretches where Ohio State couldn't score late. Florida, I don't think, scored the last 3 or 3.5 minutes, and Oral Roberts ends up winning that one. I think it should be like 13.5, though. I think it's a good sell time on Oral Roberts, as great as the story is. Arkansas is just that much better, and we're getting, in my opinion, -11, -11.5 in the market. It's value. So that's probably my biggest discrepancy in a spread. And interestingly enough, it's on a favorite, and it's on a double-digit favorite, but I think it's just kind of looking back at what was reactionary to that first weekend, and everyone's loves betting the underdog, loves the story behind Oral Roberts. So let's just keep betting them. Like, they could do it. When in reality, I think the -11s are just too low.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the recency bias that comes in with a lot of this stuff. I can't imagine the take on Arkansas is going to be very high because anyone who's watched 20 minutes of the tournament, Oral Roberts probably is the largest story. The thing that surprised me the most, though, about the Oregon State-Loyola line is that Loyola, obviously, they have a lot of pub behind them, and they were successful the last time that we saw the NCAA tournament in 2019. But I was actually kind of surprised that it was only 6.5, that so many people were... I couldn't imagine anyone looking at this game and being like, oh, give me Oregon State versus the spread. I know that they've come through as underdogs the first 2 rounds, but just the pub, Sister Jean, the social media coverage, the ESPN coverage for Loyola is just so much higher that I actually thought, and maybe we'll see this as the week goes along, that the number will just drift higher and higher on them because I can't imagine who's betting on Oregon State.
It's a good point. There's still a lot of days left. Maybe 6.5 is going to be kind of, buying the bottom of Loyola Chicago markets. So you could be right. For me personally, I generally want about a 1.5 point discrepancy between my number, my personal projection, and then where the market's at. So that's why when I'm closer to 7.5, I'd like 6. But 6.5, you're right. It might be the bottom. There's just going to be more and more coverage surrounding the Sister Jean story, Loyola Chicago again, what they've been doing. Krutwig, obviously, is a potential guy that could win most outstanding player in this tournament if they keep making a big run. So you're probably right. I'll be surprised if we see the 6.
Did we all severely underrate the Pac-12 coming into this tournament, or did they just get a weird amount of breaks going through in the first 2 rounds?
I have to pat myself on the back because I'm a West Coast guy, and people were calling me in a couple of shows I did, heading into the tournament, and they're like, oh, West Coast elitism. And here we are, the Big Ten has 1 team in the Sweet 16. The Pac-12 has 4. They covered and then won outright every single game except Colorado finally on that last day lost to Florida State. I mean, they just smashed. Now, I'll say this. I'm not going to take credit for it, but we talked about the Big Ten narrative is that, hey, it's the toughest conference in basketball. Now, a lot of when you look at like Ken Palm, or if you look at Bart Torvik, or there's some other public efficiency metrics you can look at for college basketball, they're adjusting for strength of opponent. And when all your opponents are in the Big Ten and you think that they're all really, really good, sometimes that can get overblown. And so if you looked at just raw efficiency numbers versus the adjusted ones, the biggest discrepancy in raw efficiency was the Big Ten. I'm talking about offense, like their ability to score points, right? Some of these teams that ranked in the top 25 and, adjusted efficiencies were in the 100 to 150 range in the Big Ten. And obviously, I think those got just a little bit overblown. It's probably somewhere in the middle. I also think people tend to still, they lack the ability to grasp randomness. If we ran this tournament back from the start again next week, I bet 3 or 4 Big Ten teams are in the Sweet 16. It was also partly random. And then on the other extreme side, the Pac-12 was the team that benefited from the randomness where they were just hot and, won a bunch of games. But I do think, UCLA, for example, and I am a Bruins fan, and so this is what I talk about with people. They lost their last 4 games of the tournament. Everyone's like, oh, they're an 11 seed. They're in the play-in game against Michigan State. Big Ten, so good. Tom Izzo, et cetera. UCLA ends up winning that. But then, they were a dog against BYU. Then obviously Abilene Christian game was a nice setup for them because they had the upset over Texas. But the point is, you lost the last 4 games of the year, but you need to look into it a little bit, okay? All 4 of those games were against tournament teams who, by the way, all played extremely well in this tournament as well. And 3 of those 4 losses came down to the final possession, basically. So you say, while it looked bad down the stretch, they lost 4 in a row. They were right there. And so they were a team that I think was drastically overlooked. But I'll say, going into their matchup against Alabama, this is the first time now in the tournament, 3 straight times I had value on UCLA. I actually think Alabama should be closer to 7. And this is 6.5 in the market. So this is the first time I would lean the other way going against the Bruins, similar with Oregon State. I think now, these Pac-12 teams may be getting a little overvalued. So it's kind of like those ebbs and flows or waves of the markets and buying at the right times on certain teams. This wouldn't be the time now to back the Pac-12, in my opinion.
Well, it's always fun when I had one Pac-12 team in my Final Four, and that team was Colorado. So that's always a great play on my part. Everyone wins except for them. That's always the route that you want to go down. Who do you think is the most susceptible 1 seed that is left based on their draw?
I think, right now, just off the sheer prices, Michigan versus Florida State, outside of Isaiah Livers' injury, I think, he's Michigan's best 3-point shooter, second best all-around player, I think most people would argue, potential NBA guy. So I think they're going to play cautious with him and his injury. Look, that was 3.5. Now it's down to 2.5 some spots. So money coming in on the Seminoles that's influencing the market. And so just a price that cheap relative to, Gonzaga's laying 13.5. Baylor's laying 7 now against Villanova. It's got to be Michigan. And even after that, I think Alabama has, assuming they take care of UCLA, a great chance of winning that East Regional Final against Michigan, if Michigan even can beat Florida State. So it has to be the Wolverines, not because of the Big Ten thing. It's part of it, I guess, right? They're the only one left, and maybe the Big Ten's all overrated, so therefore Michigan's overrated. But I'm not looking down that path. I think this should be more like a 1.5 point spread. So people that got the Florida State plus 3.5, plus 3s, I think those were decent bets. And I think it should be not quite a 50-50 game. Michigan wins this more like 53.7% if you're looking at the exact numbers that I have. But it's close, and so they're definitely the most susceptible, unless Livers makes a drastic recovery and appearance, and that'll help them quite a bit.
It's still currently, as we speak right now, +3 at DraftKings Sportsbook. So if you did want to grab Florida State, you can still do that. I felt like not that I'm a huge NCAA basketball head by any means, as the first moments of college basketball I watched were the first round of the tournament this year. But is Houston actually legit? Because everyone I talked to didn't seem like they were like, they're kind of like a fool's gold 2 seed, but they seem to have a pretty open path to get to the Final Four now.
So, the path's fantastic now, and they should have lost to Rutgers. I think Rutgers were up 9 or 10 with a few minutes left, and then Houston goes on the big run. So that's another reason people are going to double down on that sentiment that Houston doesn't deserve to be a 2-seed, they at least aren't going to be a team that can make a run. I'll say this. I think to the extent that Loyola Chicago was underrated and underseeded, right, when there was an 8 or 9 seed, I think Houston was probably overseeded slightly, but also both teams are still top 15 teams in the country. So, Houston maybe doesn't deserve to be a 2. Maybe they're not the quality of a 2 seed. Their resume may have been, but I think a 4 seed would have been absolutely fair. And you could even argue a 3. So I'm not going to say they're extremely overrated. They definitely have talent, and their efficiency numbers, both sides of the ball, are fantastic. The question for me, and I don't know if you have an opinion on this, are you on the East Coast? I think you're on the East Coast, or at least you were at some point, and then you've moved around. But Syracuse, do you have any ties to Syracuse or this 2-3 zone everyone hears about? It? No one can beat a 2-3 zone. And it shocks me, even in the NBA starting to incorporate zones more. It just boggles my mind that these players cannot figure out how to beat a 2-3 zone. And Syracuse, again, now as a 11 seed in the Sweet 16.
The only ties I have to Syracuse is I didn't go to Syracuse, and a lot of my colleagues and friends did. So it makes me actively root against Syracuse because
I feel like a lot of people have. That's why I just thought to ask, because 50% of the people I've talked to are like, oh, no, I went to Syracuse. Like all of a sudden, the last few weeks. Everyone's letting us know. But anyway, so I had to check, make sure you weren't an alumni either.
No, so it works one of two ways. So if you're in broadcasting or production, the chances of you running, especially in sports, because the sports program at Syracuse is awesome, and that's where just a lot of these networks and even people online just originate from. So if they populate a lot of the jobs, it's just like when you see writers around, like Northwestern is such a hot spot for sports journalism that all of a sudden that if Northwestern is good at anything, there's just an outsized voice about like, oh, look how good Northwestern is. Almost just it's exactly the same way. So if you are reading something and Northwestern is good, that's going to be blown out of proportion. Or if Syracuse is good, generally, unless Donovan McNabb was Donovan McNabb Syracuse? He was here, Syracuse, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. So
double check for you.
If they're good in football, that we'll hear about it all the time. But whenever they have a modicum of talent in basketball, it's like they're the greatest team of all time. So I feel like that does influence the markets either way. But I just like rooting against them because I have no rooting interest in any of this in terms of having loyalty to a team. So I just want to see everyone miserable because that's just the type of person that I am. Especially the people that went there too, because it's all like, oh, Syracuse is so great about everything. You must hear it. I mean, if you're a UCLA fan, you must have a lot of USC fans in your life too, right?
Dude, that is one of my biggest pet peeves, or just the thing that puts me on tilt more than actual betting on games and gambling is the fact how many friends I had growing up that were not USC fans at all until the Pete Carroll era with Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and everyone. All of a sudden, USC football got good. And every one of my friends jumped ship from UCLA and were like, oh, no, I've always been a Trojans fan, big USC guy. And it's total BS. And so I am, I guess, contrarian in the sense that I stuck with UCLA. And it's been fun to finally have a basketball team, at least this year, that's been relevant. And I'm excited to see, hopefully the next few years, they can keep improving.
Well, I mean, we didn't even talk about Oregon and USC. That's the other Sweet 16 game right now. USC's favored by 2.5 points at the moment on DraftKings Sportsbook. Do you have a lean in this game either way? Like, how did they rate out when they played each other during the season?
So they played each other once. And let me preface, I guess, Oregon's prospects in general, just because it's really intriguing. And they were the team, I think, that had more upside or a higher ceiling than people anticipated entering the tournament for a few reasons. One being Will Richardson, point guard, shoots like 40% from three. He went off against Iowa. He didn't play a single game for the Ducks until February 4th, I believe it was, right? So they played this majority of their season data is without Richardson, which is a big deal. Then Chris Duarte, who is their go-to everything guy, 43% from three. He's a prospective first-round NBA draft pick in a draft class that's absolutely stacked. Okay, he was dealing with a foot injury for a lot of the season, and he hasn't really been healthy until the last month. So when you're looking at Oregon as a team, as far as their ceiling, it's if you only looked since February 4th, they grade out a lot better than they do prior to that, and for good reason. They have two of their best scorers and shooters now playing. Dana Altman, a coach that in the past, I believe his record now, since he took over at Oregon in the Pac-12 tournament and the main March Madness Big Dance tournament, 82-40 against the spread. He just always is overachieving expectations. And so here we are now. Again, I think defensively, they can throw different schemes at USC, and they have an opportunity. A really sharp group bet the USC side, though, yesterday. Like, this was -1, which I thought was closer to fair. I am more bullish on Oregon, and I did think they were going to beat Iowa in that second round matchup. And here we are now. It's -2.5. So I like the Oregon side at +2.5. I'd love it if it kind of kept trickling up to 3. Don't know if we're going to see that. But if either way, I do think it's getting a little bit out of control. I think Oregon's just still a little bit undervalued in the market, and a team that can really do it all from a coaching aspect, defensively, and then offensively with the weapons they have.
Which one of these teams do you think that gives Gonzaga the most problems in the next round?
So I actually been talking to an assistant coach at a team that played Oregon this year, and I believe they got absolutely run out of the building. He told me that outside of maybe Baylor, but that wouldn't be until the championship game, he thinks Oregon would give Gonzaga the biggest issues because they have the size and athleticism inside to hang with Timmy, to rim protect Jalen Suggs' drives. They have like Duarte, who can, chase around Chris Bird on the outside off screens and is a good wing defender. Again, a guy that's probably going to be drafted in the first round of a stacked NBA draft coming up this year. So I think it actually is Oregon, which is interesting. They're a dog to USC, but I think USC would lack the scoring enough to ultimately hang with Gonzaga when it's all said and done. Oregon, like we just saw them just go absolutely, lethal against Iowa, didn't miss a thing. And if they're supernova again against Gonzaga, that's one of the few teams I think that can really just score with Gonzaga anyway. And so I go with the Ducks when it's all said and done, outside of Baylor in the championship game potentially.
I'm just looking at the Final Four odds for the moment. So USC is 3-1 to make the Final Four, and Oregon is 6-1 to make the Final Four. Those odds seem off based on a 2.5 point spread with these two teams playing each other. That I don't know if there's any value on Oregon at 6-1, because I would imagine if they're going up against Gonzaga, let's say it's Gonzaga versus Oregon in the next round. Like, what do you think the spread in that game is? Like 8.5, 9, 10?
Oh, I can tell you right now. So yeah, a lot of it, they're, when you're doing like a Final Four futures bet, they're projecting about, what the point spread would be going forward into that next matchup. My personal projection right now, and I'm bullish Oregon. I'm also very bullish Gonzaga. I've just, since the beginning of the year, just thought they were a tier above everyone else, but I think it would be close to 10 and maybe even 10.5. I mean, look, Gonzaga's laying 13.5 right now to Creighton. So, so I know Oregon's, they're better than Creighton. I think they do have more upside, and I've tried to kind of shade my numbers and projections to the since February 4th data rather than pre-February 4th, which I was explaining a little bit about earlier. But even so, Gonzaga's just that much better. And so the 6-1 isn't necessarily valued, because now not only do they have to win, we'll call it about a coin flip game against USC, but then they have to win as theoretically a double-digit dog to Gonzaga. And so, 6-1 isn't actually value. If you want to get cute, you want to do what I would suggest for people that are at least familiar a little bit with some betting stuff. You bet the money line now against USC, then you roll it over and you bet the money line again against Gonzaga. I think that would have a better payoff than 6-1 would right now.
It would be plus 120 to beat USC. Then it'd be around plus 400 to beat Gonzaga, maybe plus 425, depending on what the spread is.
Yeah, you might get more like an 8-1 payoff in the end instead of 6-1. Yeah.
Do you think that there are any values to make the Final Four of some of the underseeded type teams? Like if Syracuse can advance, they are 5-1 to make the Final Four. Maybe if Oregon State can pull off this upset somehow against Loyola, like they're still 7-1 to make the Final Four.
What is Loyola Chicago themselves?
They're plus 160.
I think that's value.
Okay.
I really think they're going to take care of Oregon State. I know the Beaver story is fun, nice little run. It's a different class, and we saw it against Illinois. Like you never want to take too much of a reaction to one game, but what Loyola Chicago did to Illinois, and basically just you came away from that game thinking, wow, if they ran this 10 times, Loyola Chicago would probably win the majority of them. They were just that much better. Maybe eventually Illinois figures out how to counter a few things, but just on an IQ level and execution level, Loyola Chicago is probably the best team in the tournament, even more so than Gonzaga, right? So I think they're going to take care of business. And then even if it is Houston, which would be worst case scenario in the Elite Eight matchup for Loyola Chicago, I only have them about a 2-point dog to Houston. And depending on the results, maybe it's not even 2. It could be more, closely aligned to a 50-50 game. So, and if Syracuse upsets Houston, then you have plus 160 on Loyola Chicago as a pretty big favorite against Syracuse. So, and by the way, and I trust them to figure out how to beat a 2-3 zone. So that's actually in that region, a team that I still think offers the most value, because I do like them here in the matchup against Oregon State.
This tournament season, take care of your hair and your holes with the best tools for the job. We're talking about our sponsors, Manscaped, the global leaders in male grooming from head to toe. And when the clock winds down in March, be clutch and avoid the upset with the Manscaped Performance Package to keep all your hair and holes trimmed. Manscaped is trusted by over 2 million men worldwide. Join the Manscaped movement. Start taking care of your balls today with 20% off plus free shipping by going to manscaped.com and using code MAYO for exclusive offer. Your bracket isn't supposed to be perfect, but with the Manscaped Performance Package, you can be confident that your nose, ear, and ball pubes are. You ever try to pluck disgusting nose hair? Yeah, it's the worst. That makes the Manscaped Performance Package the ultimate men's hygiene bundle and the #1 seed overall this March. Included in the package is the Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer. It provides proprietary, skin-safe technology which helps reduce nicks, snags, and tugs even those delicate holes. And 79% of partners polled admitted that long nose hair, major turnoff. And if you're not a catch to begin with, you're in an even bigger hole. Plus, your purchase goes towards a great cause because they've partnered with the GOAT, Alex Caruso, and the Testicular Cancer Society to bring awareness to testicular cancer, men's health, and early cancer detection. Manscaped is committed to raising awareness for the most common form of cancer in men ages 15 to 35 and giving support for fighters, survivors, and families impacted by testicular cancer as a part of the We Save Balls initiative. Get 20% off and free shipping with code MAYO at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code MAYO. When things get hairy, make sure to call on Manscaped in a clutch time. Thank you, Manscaped, for making our holes look sexy during the dance. Back to the show. All right, well, let's switch over to NBA for a second, because I was looking at the future odds to win the NBA championship this morning, and it's really tough with all of the injuries that have happened to all these preeminent franchises that the Nets and Lakers are now the co-favorites to win the NBA title, at least at DraftKings Sportsbook being plus 285 at the moment. Then it's the Clippers at plus 550. Then you have the Bucks at 7-1. Is there a case for the Bucks here now that Holiday is back? They've made their Tucker move, that they've been ousted in the playoffs the past few years, that maybe that they've been through this enough times now that, like, are we even certain that, I mean, on paper, Brooklyn's obviously the best team if Embiid isn't going to be 100% in the Eastern Conference, but, like, can we be sure that Durant can string together, like, 4 consecutive games without having to sit out 3 weeks?
No, we can't be sure. But they also are being, I think, extremely cautious now, which bodes well for the playoffs. He's going to come back, and I think he'll be nearly 100% healthy at that point, and that's really all that they need, because crazily, James Harden's just carried this team since they traded for him without Kevin Durant. And so I'll say this. I was completely wrong. When they traded for Harden, I thought that there was, theoretically, after the trade value, the Bucks were plus 325 just to win the East. I didn't even want to deal with the Lakers potentially, or if it's the Clippers, whoever it may be in the championship in the NBA Finals. As I said, in the East, Bucks plus 325. Like, look, they're being overlooked. They're going to figure out. They had a slowish start. Drew Holiday is an upgrade. Their problem in the past is that Mike Budenholzer would embrace their depth, and he'd probably play 10 or 11 guys in these series, and just was too many guys. You only need to play 7 or 8 in a playoff series if your back's to the wall. He was overplaying guys, not enough minutes to his key guys. I was like, that's going to change now because they're not as deep. He'll just have to rely on Middleton, Holiday, and Giannis, etc. And then what the Nets have done without Durant, and even Kyrie Irving sitting out games in there, even the game last night against Portland, right? Harden, he's 50-50 to even play the game. He ends up playing. They don't have Irving. They just lost Landry Shamet as well, who's one of their top 7 role guys that, again, they're not even that deep because they had to give up pieces to even get James Harden in the first place. And everyone's been talking about their defense. And again, going back to when this trade happened, I was like, they can score all the points they want. If they can't get stops, it doesn't matter. Look, they're getting enough stops now, and it actually may not ultimately matter because they're just scoring more points than you. Like, they're that good. I think they are historically good offensively, and they don't even have Durant playing yet. And I underrated, for being someone that was always pro analytics, pro Houston Rockets, I myself underrated just how much of an impact James Harden has on the basketball court for an offense. And you surround him with, like, Joe Harris shooting 50% from 3. Like, this is, like, I think ultimately it's the Rockets on steroids, and the Rockets almost be one of the best teams of the generation, Warriors, if Chris Paul doesn't go down with an injury, or if the Rockets don't miss 27 straight threes in a game 7. Like, I think this team, it's by far the Nets now in the East, unless there's a trade made. So I want to pretend like it's the Bucks, who, by the way, I think Giannis strained his knee recently. It was announced he has a sprained knee. He might miss some time now. So that's not great news. And ultimately for me, it's the Nets to win the East. And I'm not sure about the finals. I think plus 285 is it's about like a 26-27% chance. It's kind of the implied probability at that price. The Nets winning that, it's probably about fair. It's not like I'm rushing to bet the Nets now. I'm just admitting I was wrong thinking that they couldn't do it. And I think they're just a tier above everyone else in that Eastern Conference.
Yeah, and like you said, we've seen them play without 2 of there are three big names, or just even
nuts,
two on the court, one on the court. It doesn't really seem to matter at this point. I'd be curious to see how that plays itself out in a playoff series, though, if they were to miss, one of them or even potentially two. Let's just say Durant and or Harden. So if you had Kyrie in there, that's great and everything. It seems like he is the third fiddle on that team, though, doesn't he?
I'll tell you this. I was doing my numbers for another show last week, and they want to show like my top 10 NBA teams. And I was just doing them as currently constructed. So, for example, the Lakers without Anthony Davis at the time, now they don't have LeBron, but they were 7th. But that's without Anthony Davis. The Sixers had dropped from, I think, 5th in my rankings to 11th because of Joel Embiid being out. Right now, the Nets, as of last week at least, and they're just improving more and more. Without Durant, I had them grading out as the third best team in the NBA. Without Durant, they're already the third best team in the NBA, slightly behind Milwaukee. So if they were to meet and play the entire series without Kevin Durant, I still think that, again, depends maybe on home court and that advantage, but it's nearly a toss-up series. That's without Durant at all. Just throw him off the team, and Nets-Bucks is a 50-50 series, which is just crazy to think about then adding a top 5 guy, or at least a top 3 scorer of all time potentially in Kevin Durant with all that he can do. I wish I wasn't so blind or a couple months back. There was so much value on Brooklyn now, and it's too obvious, and I'm still, as you can tell, upset at myself for that.
So Brooklyn to win the East is even money. The Bucks are 3-1. The Sixers are still 5-1, and the Heat are 12-1. Is there a move that the Heat can make? Because obviously the NBA trade deadline has not happened as of us speaking, but the rumors are still floating around with Kyle Lowry about potentially getting him. It seems like Norman Powell might be packaged in a deal with wherever Lowry ends up going, depending on what the return is going to be. That could they vault themselves up as just maybe not as a favorite, but as a team that could chip away just through defense alone at one of these super high scoring teams?
I definitely think that's the one trade someone could do that maybe we were talking before we even hit record, and I was like, I'm not following it too closely because there's nothing really trade-wise in the market that could move the needle enough. I got to hurry and bet something to try to get value out of it, right? Like if there's a book that leaves a number and hangs a number up too long. The one that's closest, though, is if the Sixers or the Heat, those are the two teams that if they added Kyle Lowry, and if they packaged it, for example, the Sixers, I believe, Norman Powell only makes about $10 million a year, which is less than I thought. A friend of mine pointed it out last night when we were chatting. And so they could swap essentially Danny Green for Norman Powell, which at this point in Danny Green's career, love the guy. I think that would be an upgrade for the Sixers. So if they somehow added Norman Powell and Kyle Lowry, I mean, that's a team that, again, they're already one of the top teams record-wise in the East. And if you can, we're talking about, and again, I think this is all about who can construct the team that can hang with the Nets. You can put Kyle Lowry on Irving, Harden, right? You have Ben Simmons you can put on Harden especially, and even KD at times. You have Joel Embiid that's one of the best rim protectors in the league. That's, I think, the ultimate team that Doc Rivers, obviously, I think he went from being an overrated coach to an underrated one after some of the runs he made with lesser talent in the Clippers and what they're doing, for example, without Embiid right now. The Sixers keep winning games anyway. I think he can put together a game plan to, at least hang with the Nets. So that's the trade. I think you nailed it. What would you say the prices were? Was it 5-1 on the Sixers, 12-1 on the Heat? My guess is that the Sixers, because they have such a high seed already, are already priced pretty fairly, even if they got Lowry. But the Heat side is the one because they've just started so slowly, and people have kind of forgot that they were just in the NBA Finals. At 12-1, if they got a Lowry addition, even Norman Powell as well, that's a big upgrade. Some of the depth that they've been lacking, and that's probably the one that has the most value theoretically at that point.
If we look at the West, the Lakers, obviously the favorites, plus 125. Then you have the Clippers, the Jazz, the Nuggets. How long is Davis going to be out? And if he, is there a chance that he just doesn't come back?
Yeah, actually, what I've heard, and you hear things left and right, pretty concrete source though. Now it might be different because of LeBron injury, but hopefully he's just out 4 weeks like they're anticipating. I heard they were going to most likely just wait until the playoffs with Anthony Davis, that it was worse than they put on earlier, saying he was going to be day-to-day or just, 2 weeks. They were just going to wait, hope he was 100% come playoff time, and, use that opening series where they were going to likely be a big favorite to kind of reacclimate to Anthony Davis and getting him back in a groove. They might not be able to afford that now for a few reasons. One, they might be in the playoff game or I should say play-in game, where the NBA is doing the like 7 through 10 seeds do a one-off kind of tournament just to get the 7 and 8 seed spots. If they're in that 7 through 10, like coming down to the final week stretch, they don't want to have one game on the line to determine if they even make the playoffs. So they're going to do all that they can to make sure they're in the 5 or 6 spot. But they're like the Spurs and Mavs are right behind them. Like it's possible that they would drop off there. So I think Davis probably has to come back as soon as he like literally can, as opposed to just waiting as long as they were hoping. But look, without LeBron and him, I mean, 2 games so far, they've looked absolutely terrible. So it could be even worse. Maybe they're a team that's a buyer come playoff time, but or I should say trade deadline. But I will say this, I think there's other teams in the West realizing there's an opportunity here. And Denver's a team I think I would throw into the Kyle Lowry sweepstakes. I'd love to see him kind of bring a defensive fronted face to Denver alongside Jamal Murray and Jokic and MPJ. Or maybe they have to give up MPJ to get Lowry. I'm not sure how that would eventually work. Probably not. I think they would trade Gary Harris, Bull, and like a pick or 2. But that's a team in the Western Conference that I think could make a move now, because they've been, in the Western Conference Finals a few times in recent years, and they've been close. Get Kyle Lowry in there, they're a team that might contend in the West.
So there seems to be a big separation in the odds in the West about who is actually going to win. Like I said, the Lakers are the favorite plus 125. The Clippers are 2.5 to 1 to win the West. The Jazz are 4 to 1. Then there's a drop off in the odds. It goes straight to the Nuggets and the Suns, both at 12 to 1. The Mavs are 25 to 1. Is that just because like people like Luka and they want to bet on Luka? Like I don't understand how the Mavs could be favored over like the Blazers right now, who are 30 to 1, who could be in the mix to add someone as well. Like it strikes me that in a playoff series, if they can get the right complementary pieces, that they can just be a lot of trouble because they have so much upside on the court at the same time, that if all these teams are weaker than we thought at the very top end, like why not Portland?
Sure.
If they can get like Aaron Gordon, let's say.
So I think this is a good question. Let's preface it with this. They actually played a back-to-back a couple of days ago, and both games, I believe Dallas was a favorite in Portland both times. So that's just kind of put into perspective. The betting markets value Dallas overall as a better team than Portland. Now, the records may not say it. Then that has a lot to do with, let's look at Dallas's season. They start the year where it was an early start, and they've been public about Luka Doncic not being in shape because he thought they were going to start in January, and they started in December. And similarly, Porzingis couldn't play the first set of games because he was coming off of an injury, and they were hoping that the season wouldn't start until January. As soon as Porzingis finally comes back in February, 5 of their main 8 role players go down with COVID. They each miss 2 to 3 weeks. They're trying to deal with that. It's hard for them to win games with Luka, KP, and a bunch of like G League level guys. Understandably so. And now that they're all finally healthy right before the break and the All-Star break, and then since, they've just been a much better team. And they're a team that I think you have to be cautious with assessing those first 2 months of the season, with some of the reasons that I mentioned. And they're a team that at the All-Star break, I said probably underachieved relative to, their potential. And one of the teams that overachieved their underlying metrics as far as how many wins they had versus where their defense grades and offense grades, it was Portland. So I think that's one of the teams that's a sell team. And you've just seen Damian Lillard go absolutely bonkers late in games and hits every 30-footer. And they win all of these close games until finally last night, Brooklyn actually beat them. But they've just won a ton of games late that when it comes down to it, their team as a whole, especially, they did get CJ McCollum back now. And if they can get Yusuf Nurkic back, he'll help. So it's not Enes Kanter at center all day. I still think they're missing one more piece though. But you're right. If they made a deal, then you're absolutely spot on. But I don't know if they have the assets to. They traded for Robert Covington already. They actually, I think Dallas is a team that has assets where they could make a move on someone. Even like Siakam, I heard a rumor about. He actually might be a secret sneaky Raptor that everyone thinks isn't on the table because everyone else is, but actually Siakam is as well if they just blow it up completely. So Dallas could make some moves, so could Portland. But Dallas is the better team, despite, I think, people's general view and perception.
MVP odds. I always got to talk about the MVP. Is anyone going to be left at the end of the season? And it's just going to be Jokic, where it's like, oh yeah, he played the entire season. He's the MVP.
So unfortunately, yeah, I made a big wager on Embiid. The only guy I bet preseason was Embiid, and he was over 40 to 1. And so I'm hoping he comes back and there's a chance. And if they keep winning without him, they might be cautious and just rest him longer. So he seems dead. LeBron's probably going to be out of it. Giannis has this knee strain issue that just got announced a little while ago. So if he's missing time for a while, then we will see. I think Jokic is around even money. I'm not sure where DraftKings actually has it at, but that's probably a similar price range. So you're basically betting, is it Jokic versus the field? And until today, Giannis was one of the main guys that could catch him in the field. And now he might not be. I think everyone hates the fact that Harden did the Houston thing early and like forced his way out and wasn't trying, but theoretically, he's been one of the most valuable players in the league. We talked about him in the Nets. Luka and Dame, I think, are maybe two that come, from further back. Steph was partly in that discussion until he got injured. So you're right. I think right now, and you hate to call it by default because that's like taking away from Jokic and what Denver's been doing. But by default, Jokic is going to win, I think, now. I just think he has to be the favorite, and he's had an extraordinary season on top of it. But I don't think he was ready, or the voters were ready to give it to him with all of the other guys in contention, and now they kind of have to be. So, I hate to say unfortunately, but I am an Embiid investor, so I think it's Jokic at this point.
Well, Jokic is minus 110 right now to win the MVP. Embiid is still second on DraftKings Sportsbook in the odds at 5-1. Then LeBron and Giannis are next up. Then Harden, he's at 9-1. Then it's Luka, Dame Lillard, and Steph Curry. They're all 14-14 and 20-1. Is there any way Kawhi, if the Clippers get the 1 seed, could end up being the MVP?
He's kind of just always the long forgotten stud, right? Like he's just so quiet and not flashy on the court. Like he's not hitting step back 35 footers like Lillard is or Steph is. And he's not doing the passes Jokic is, and he's not even like LeBron level, obviously. And I think there's basically no shot, and the odds are kind of telling you that. And I think we actually talked about this on one of the betting broadcasts we did. I think it was 2 weeks ago. It was some sort of imaginary hypothetical prop bet, but it was, would you bet on Kawhi to win an MVP in the next 5 years or Devin Booker? I don't know. I think the Suns and Clippers were potential. I think they were playing each other. And I thought it was an interesting question because I think if you were looking at 2 to 3 years, you would say Kawhi. But right now there's just this extraordinary, the league is just stacked. There's all these stars, and Kawhi just doesn't really fit that mold of a guy. And plus, he's getting load managed and he's missing games here and there. They're never rushing to have him play all 82 or anything. And with everyone and all these stars that are in the mix right now, it's hard to see Kawhi doing it. And then he's probably going to start tailing off eventually, right? Just because of age and what he'll be able to do. And so I think what I ended up choosing for the hypothetical was Booker, hoping that, Chris Paul eventually retires, is out of the mix, and Booker becomes this 30-10 guy in 3 years or something. It's possible. But it's an interesting question. It gets to the point where I think Kawhi, yes, overlooked, underrated as a player and impact-wise. He's one of the best 5 guys still in the league, in my opinion. But the MVP markets, they don't care. And it ultimately is who's going to vote for who. And you're handicapping voters in the end. So it's just a twist that you have to consider.
Well, I guess the reason that I would bring him up, he's 40-1 right now to win the MVP. If the Clippers do end up with the 1 seed, you'd have to think that is a big boost for him. And then it's just kind of we've seen Embiid get hurt, LeBron get hurt, Giannis get hurt, Luka show up out of shape. Like, what if Jokic gets hurt? What happens then? Or are we just too deep into the season that it doesn't matter?
All right. I'm looking up the records right now. I'm pulling up the standings, I should say, because the other funny part about this is Utah had that extraordinary run, right? They still have the best record in basketball, I believe. Yeah, they do, by about a game on the Sixers. And no one's in the conversation from Utah because Gobert kind of takes care of the defense, and Mitchell and Conley have had great offensive seasons, as the high usage guys. So the Clippers, let's see. Okay, so they're 4 games back. And then another thing is the Suns have, the 3rd best record or 4th best record in the NBA. And, we're not talking about Chris Paul or Devin Booker at all. So I think it just kind of goes to the point that the league's so stacked and there's so many options. But if Jokic got hurt, if Embiid didn't come back in a week, and LeBron was out for 4 to 6 weeks, and Giannis's knee thing, ends up, I think you just have to, at that point, sure, Kawhi would climb the list. You're right. He wouldn't be 40-1 anymore. But I think at that point, people would just have to get over the fact that James Harden punted a few games early on in the season, forced his way out of Houston, but he's been the most valuable player probably in the league at that point. If he makes this entire run, then that's only a game behind the Sixers anyways, right? Like if they end up getting the 1 seed in the East or the best record in the league and they didn't have Durant for the majority of it, you just have to give it to Harden, I think, at that point. And it'll probably pain people to do it and voters to do it. But I think he's the guy that if Jokic got hurt would become the new favorite.
All right. Preston Johnson at Sports Cheetah on Twitter. Can you give us any sort of information on what bets.tv might be?
Bets TV, yeah. We this will be, I guess, the first time we'll throw it out there, but I appreciate you letting me give it a shout out. So it's a new network I'm starting with some friends that I want to have a daily show, and we're building out a studio here in Southern California, and it'll be a professional studio. I'm going to do a daily show. I think will be called Last Word Cheetah. It'll be a call-in show, which really it's kind of like old school radio meets sports betting. There's not really a show out there where the sports betting prognosticators are actually taking calls and talking about the games the audience wants to talk about or bet on. And so we're going to do it, 1 to 2 hours a day. We're getting things set up, but it'll be one of the main shows, or we'll call it the flagship show of Bets TV. And eventually, hopefully, Bets TV is a network that is big in the space and has people from all over the place doing their own shows. And we're going to grow it out. And it should be a fun project.
All right. Well, everyone, go check that out and follow Preston once again at Sports Cheetah to get more information once the network is up and launched, or at least when it's getting close to launch. So you can go subscribe over there. Of course, subscribe to Mayo Media Network as well. If you're watching out there, smash the like button to the episode and give me your updated Final Four for the NCAA tournament. Remember to subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. Leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts if you got an extra 20 seconds in your day. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.
That Mayo experience! Experience!